Hi everyone, welcome to another video of variables and data types. So in our previous video, we talked about what is a variable, what are the data types in Java, and we also talked about the relationships between the data type and the variable. Now let's talk about how we can declare the variables and how to assign a value to a variable. We will also do a couple more practices with the variable declaration and assigning values to the variable. Okay. So the variables, they must be declared first before you use them. Without declaring it, you cannot use any variable at all. Okay. And every time when you declare the variable, Java allocates a space in the memory based on the data type that you specified. Each data type, they do have different memory, right? In our previous video, we did talk about the primitive data types. We also got to know the memory of each of those primitive data types. Okay. And when it comes to declaring the variable, we need to follow this syntax to declare the variable. First, we give the data type and then the variable name. Using the right data type is essential because data type defines what kind of value can be stored into this variable name. And the variable name, it should be more readable and understandable so that it's going to be easier for you to use it and read it as well. Okay. So for example, if I need to create the variables like quantity, if I know that the quantity is going to be integer number, then I can use int. Int is basically one of those 4 primitive data types that supports integer values. Do you still remember what are the 4 primitive data types that supports integer values? They are byte, short, int, and long. So those are the 4 primitive data types that you can use when it comes to storing integer values. Of course, each of those integer primitive data types, they do have different range of values. Okay, so int is the most preferred primitive type when it comes to integer value. And as soon as you declare this variable, in the Java allocates a space in the memory based on this data type that you provided. Int, it has a 4 bytes of memory. So in the random access memory, we will have a space that's created, and this space will have 4 bytes of memory. And after you finish declaring the variable, you could store some value into that variable by using the assignment operator. So first step is declaring the variable, and then you can assign any value that you want to that variable as long as the data type is matching. Okay. So when I assign any value, when I try to store any data into this variable, I can use this assignment operator. For example, just now in the presentation slide, we have seen this quantity variable declared. And after this quantity variable is declared, I could use the assignment operator to store integer values to this variable. Because we were using primitive data type int for this variable. Okay, data type of this variable is int, which means it only accepts integer values. And this value that we are storing is within the scope of the primitive int. If you look at the range of values of int, this number is definitely within the range of int. And what will happen when I store this data into the variable? This is what happens in the background. So 355, it is allocated memory space for the variable quantity. But of course, 355 will be converted to the binary code because CPU can only process the machine codes. Machine codes are in binary code, which constructed with zeros and ones. Okay, and next time when you call this variable quantity, whatever the data was stored into this memory of the variable quantity will be returned to you. Okay, so here are a couple more examples of variable declaration and assignments. We can use int for the integer values, and then when it comes to the floating point numbers, if the value is floating point values, the preferred primitive data type that we have is double. Okay, and double is not the only primitive data type that supports floating point values. In Java, there are 2 primitive data types that supports floating point values. What are they? They are double and float, right? But double is the most preferred one. And of course, after you declare the variable, you could assign the value to a variable. And after the first initialization, you could also assign a new value to the variable. And when it comes to declaration and assignment and initialization, make sure do not confuse those terms. Okay. Declaration means creation of a variable. Okay. When a so such as you see A and B are created here. When you give the data type and then specify the variable name, that means that variable has been created. It's known as the declaration. And assignment is when you store the values into the variable. That's the term that is used, assignment. And initialization. So this initialization means when a value is assigned to a variable for the very first time, then it's called initialization. For example, if I just declare this variable and assign the value here, since this is the first time I am assigning value, it's known as initialization. You could also call assignment, yes, but if it's the first assignment of this variable, then it's known as initialization. Okay. And when you declare the variables, if multiple variables are going to have the same data type, you could declare multiple variables in one statement. If I'm declaring multiple variables in one statement, I will use one data type and then give the variables back to back. I will use this comma to separate them. After finish declaring all the variables with this data type, then I can give this semicolon, like the first example here. And of course, when you declare the multiple variables at once, if there is any data that needs to be stored into a specific variable, you can also do so by using this assignment operator right after that variable declaration. Okay, so second and third ways are also correct. And so is the third way. In the fourth example here, you see we declare this variable I1, I2, I3, and we stored 0 to I3 only. But we haven't assigned any values to I1, I2 yet. But still they are variables. Okay? And when you declare multiple variables in one statement, one thing that you need to pay attention is that it's not allowed to use more than one data type in the multiple declaration. For example, if you need to declare two variables with two different types, then it cannot be declared within one statement. If you try to declare it in one statement, after declaring first variable with the long data type, for example, and then you give comma to try to declare second variable of different type, then it's going to give you this error. Now let's take a look at this practice task. In this practice task, you are required to declare 4 variables, 1 byte variable, 1 short, 1 int, and 1 long variables. And then you need to assign the maximum values of each of those primitive data types to their variables. Okay. So please create a new package under your source folder. For this module, let's create the package named module 10 variables data types. Okay. And then please create your first class, name it whole numbers, because this time we are trying to create the variables that supports whole numbers. Okay. Here's my class. Next, I will create the main method to make this class to be runnable. And now let me declare my variable. And when it comes to declaring the variable, you need to follow the same syntax. Okay, the syntax is first the data type and then the variable name. Of course, in order to make the variable name to be more readable, you should apply camel case. Variable names in Java starts with the lowercase, but if it contains more than one word, then starting from second word, each word's first letter should be in uppercase. Okay, that's known as the camel case. So this is how we declare the variable. After finish declaring the variable, then you could use the assignment operator to assign the value to the variable. Okay, any data that you want to store, you can assign it as long as it's matching with the specified data type. So first I need to declare the byte variable. So I still have to follow this syntax. First the data type is byte, I give byte. And then I need to give the variable name. So I'm trying to store the maximum value of byte into the variable that I'm about to declare. So therefore, I could name my variable name as max byte, maximum value of byte. Okay. See, I just declared this variable maximum value of byte, max byte. And if I know what data needs to be stored into this variable, I could have assigned the data right away to this variable right after the declaration. So the maximum value of byte, as we seen in the presentation slide, it is 127. Okay. And after this variable is declared, I could print this variable. And did you notice when I'm trying to print this variable, I did not use double quote here in the print statement. I just called the variable name itself. What happens if I use the double quote? If you use the double quote, that means this one right now, it is treated as a string of text instead of variable. So if I run it now, it's just going to print me max byte. You see, it's not getting me the value of this byte variable. Instead, it just printed this message on console. I don't want this one to be treated as the string of text. I want it to get me the actual value of this variable. So it needs to be treated as a variable. If it needs to be treated as a variable, then you shouldn't be giving it within the double quote. So I will call the variable instead. So now you see 127 has been returned to me. And what's the advantage here? What's the advantage of using this variable? So by using this variable, we don't have to memorize what the maximum value of byte is anymore. We can just call this variable and then it will return us the data that we stored. Okay. And I can do the same for the next variable that I'm about to declare, which is short. So I need to declare a very short variable and store the maximum value of short primitive data type into this variable. And let me name this variable max short. Okay. And the maximum value of short primitive data type is 32,767 as it's shown on your presentation slide. Okay. Now, if I run this, if I also print this variable max short, you see, this is the data that I got on console. And also, when you have large numbers like this, you could make it a little more readable by adding one additional character. So in the accounting, you could add the comma to make the large numbers to be readable, right? After each 3 digits starting from right to left, you could add the comma in accounting. But in Java, this comma is used for separating the variables. It's not used for making the numbers readable. So what we should do here is we should use the underscore instead. So in Java, you could use the underscore to replace the comma that you have in the accounting. So if I run this program now, you see the underscore is not printed. It's still printing me 32,767. The whole purpose of this underscore here that we gave between those numbers just to make the large number to be more readable. So here's the maximum value of short. And next we can declare the next variable int and store the maximum value of integer into this variable int. Okay, let me name this variable max int. And the maximum value of int is, I'm just going to copy paste the value from our presentation slide. This is the maximum value of int. And again, I could also add this underscore after each 3 digits from right to left to make this number little more readable. Okay. And then let me print this variable max int. And since Java executes codes from top to bottom, you see, this first print statement, it prints the maximum value of byte. And then in the next line on the console, we have the maximum value of short. And lastly is the maximum value of int. Okay. And now the last one is the long primitive data type, another primitive data type that supports integer values. And I will name this variable as max long. Next, I need to store the maximum value of long into this variable. So the maximum value of long is this number, okay? And when I store this number into this variable, you see, as soon as I enter this number, it is giving me this compile error. Why? Let's move the mouse over to see what the issue is. It says integer number too large, okay? You could also click this error button here to see what the issue is. Integer number too large at line 12. So why this why it says this integer number is too large? I know that the long is capable enough to contain this large number. The reason is because every time when you enter any integer, most of the time it's by default taken as an int. So this one now, it's treated as an int number. That's why it's giving you this error, because it's out of int range. So now what I need to do is I need to add some additional character to let the compiler know that this is a long number instead. Instead of int number, I need to specify that this is a long number. So in order to do that, you could add the lowercase l or uppercase L characters to specify that this is a long number. So now this is a long number, and since it's within the range of long, it's not going to cause any error. And this long number, it is being stored into the long variable. Next, if I print this variable max long, it is going to display me the maximum number of long. And I could also add the underscore after each 3 digits starting from right to left to make this large number to be more readable. And again, this underscore is totally optional. If you want to make it more readable, please go ahead, add it. Okay, so this is our first practice task. And here is one more practice task. In this practice task, now we need to declare float and double those variables and store the maximum float and maximum double values into those variables. Okay, so for this task, please create a new class under this package. And let's name this floating points. Okay. And let me create my main method to make this class be more readable. So now I need to declare the variables of double and float, because those are the data types that supports the floating point values, right? So first one is float. If you go from smallest to largest. Float, let me name this variable max float. So float, it could accept any floating numbers as long as it's within the range, right? So suppose that I have this floating point now value, which is 3.14. As soon as I assign the 3.14, it is giving me this compiler error. Okay. Why? Because the reason is pretty much similar with the reason of assigning the long primitive variable that we seen earlier. So when you enter some floating point values, by default it is taken as a double. If you move the mouse over here, you see it's saying that required type was float, but you provided double. How come we provided double here? Since the number that you entered is floating point value 3.14, by default it's taken as double, since it's the preferred primitive data type for floating point values. Okay, so in this case now, in order to let the compiler know that this is a float number, not a double number, I could add lowercase f or uppercase f to make it as a float number. Then the float number can be assigned to the float variable. And if you print this variable afterwards, it's going to give you the maximum float number, 3.14. Okay, so this is a float variable. And I could also declare double variable. Let me name it this max double. So after the variable is declared, you could assign the value to this variable in the next step, in the next line if you want. Okay, for example, I declare this variable at line 8, right? And if I choose to initialize this variable at line 10, I could call the variable name and then store 3.14 here. But when I initialize this variable, I cannot give a data type here. If I give a data type, it means that I'm trying to create a new variable. Okay, every time when you give the data type and the variable, that means you are creating a variable. Since this variable has already been created, so you see, it is giving you this compiler. Every single variable name needs to be unique. That's why when you try to create another variable here, it's giving you this compiler. I do not want to create another variable. I just want to use this variable and reassign the value to this variable. So I deleted this data type. Now you see I assigned the 3.14 to this variable max double. And if I print this variable max double, we got 3.14. This time I didn't have to add any special character, because by default it is taken as a double. Of course, you could have added this lowercase d or uppercase d to specify, to tell the compiler that this is a double number. But since the double is the preferred primitive data type for all the floating values, it's not necessary. And remember, every single variable that you declare within the block, they must be initialized before you use them. Those variables that we are declaring so far are known as the local variables. Local variables are the variables that are declared within the scope of a block, within a block of like method or any other block. Okay, and if you try to use those local variables without initializing them first, for example, after line 8, if I try to use this variable max double, you see, it is going to give me this compile error because the local variables, the variables that you declare within the method's body, they must be initialized first. In the future, you will learn different type of variables that will be declared outside the methods. That time you will not see this error. But every time when you declare a variable within the body of method, you need to initialize them first before you use them. Otherwise, you get compile error. Thank you so much, everyone. See you all in the next video.